attention to this security footage from a residential building hallway in Seattle. It's early morning, and you can see someone approaching a condo door. Watch closely, see how they pause, look around, then knock. Notice the way they're standing, the familiarity in their movements. This isn't a stranger casing the place. This is someone who knows exactly where they're going, someone who's been here before. In just a few moments, behind that door, a brutal murder will take place. And what you're watching right now? It would take investigators 23 years to understand what they were really seeing. You know that feeling when you finally find the person you're meant to spend your life with? When everything just clicks into place and the future suddenly looks brighter than it ever has before? For Michelle Torres, that feeling was everything she'd been waiting for. It was 2005, and Michelle had just married David Chen, a software engineer she'd met through mutual friends 2 years earlier. At 29 years old, Michelle was living her dream. She worked as a critical care nurse at Seattle General Hospital, a job she was passionate about, and she'd just bought a beautiful condo in the Capitol Hill neighborhood with David. They were talking about starting a family. Life was good. Life was perfect, actually. Michelle was one of those people who lit up every room she walked into. Her colleagues at the hospital adored her. She was the kind of nurse who remembered patients' birthdays, who stayed late to hold someone's hand, who made scared families feel like everything was going to be okay. Her parents, Roberto and Carmen Torres, had immigrated from the Philippines when Michelle was just a baby, and they'd instilled in her this incredible work ethic and compassion that defined everything she did. David, meanwhile, was quieter, more reserved. Where Michelle was all warmth and energy, he was thoughtful and steady. They balanced each other perfectly. Friends said they'd never seen two people more in love. But here's what nobody knew. Nobody except David, and he wasn't telling. There was someone from his past who wasn't ready to let go. Someone who watched Michelle and David's happiness with growing resentment. Someone who felt like Michelle had stolen the life that should have been hers. And that someone wasn't just anybody. She was a cop, a detective with the Seattle Police Department, and she knew exactly how to get away with murder. February 11th, 2006 started like any other Saturday for Michelle Torres. David had left for work early that morning. He was consulting on a weekend project and wouldn't be home until late afternoon. Michelle had the day off from the hospital, and she was planning to use it to organize their home office, maybe go for a run later. Simple Saturday plans. Around 10:30 a.m., David tried calling Michelle to ask about dinner plans. No answer. He figured she was probably in the shower or had gone out for groceries. He called again around noon. Still nothing. By 2 p.m., when his calls kept going straight to voicemail, a knot started forming in his stomach. David got home around 4:15 that afternoon. The moment he pulled into their building's parking garage, he noticed Michelle's silver Honda was still there. That was strange. If she'd gone out, she usually took her car. He took the elevator up to their third-floor condo, already feeling that something was wrong in a way he couldn't quite name. The front door was locked. That was normal. But when he opened it and stepped inside, everything stopped being normal. The living room looked like a war zone. The glass coffee table was shattered. Picture frames were knocked off the walls. Their bookshelf had been pushed over, books scattered everywhere. And there was blood. On the carpet, on the wall, smeared across the doorway to the bedroom. "Michelle?" David's voice cracked as he called out. But he already knew. You know that moment when your brain is trying to protect you from what your eyes are seeing? That's where David was. "Michelle?" He found her in the hallway near their bedroom. Michelle was lying face down on the hardwood floor, and the scene was horrific. She'd been beaten badly. Her face was swollen and bruised. There was a gunshot wound to her chest, 2 more to her abdomen. The coroner would later determine she'd been shot 3 times at close range with a .38 caliber weapon. But here's what made it even more horrific. Michelle had fought back, hard. Her knuckles were bruised and bloodied. There were defensive wounds all over her arms. A decorative vase near her body was broken, and it was clear she'd tried to use it as a weapon. Most significantly, there was a distinctive bite mark on her left forearm. deep enough that it had broken the skin. Michelle had fought for her life with everything she had. David collapsed next to his wife's body, screaming for help. A neighbor heard him and called 911. Within minutes, Seattle police officers were swarming the building. Detective Marcus Powell was the lead investigator assigned to the case. When he walked into that condo, his first thought was domestic violence. The statistics pointed that way, and the husband is always the first suspect. But David Chen was devastated in a way that seemed impossible to fake. Plus, his alibi was rock solid. His co-workers confirmed he'd been at the office all day. So if not the husband, then who? The crime scene told a confusing story. The back door had been jimmied open. Someone had used a crowbar or similar tool to force entry. But here's the thing about that back door. It led to a small balcony that you could only access from inside the building or by climbing up from the alley, which would be incredibly difficult and conspicuous. Why would a random burglar choose that entry point? In the bedroom, drawers had been pulled open and their contents dumped on the floor. It looked like someone had been searching for valuables. Michelle's Honda was still in the garage, but David's expensive watch collection was untouched on his dresser. Michelle's jewelry box sat right there on the vanity, full of gold necklaces and diamond earrings from her family, none of it taken. Detective Powell found a stereo receiver near the back door, unplugged, like someone had been trying to steal it but got interrupted. But the TV was still mounted on the wall, the laptop was still on the desk. What kind of burglar leaves behind a laptop? It doesn't make sense, Powell told his partner. If this was a burglary, why fight the victim to the death over a stereo? Why not just run when she confronted you? The medical examiner's report raised even more questions. Michelle had been shot 3 times, but the fight had gone on for much longer than that. She had bruises and abrasions all over her body that suggested a prolonged, brutal physical altercation. The bite mark on her arm was photographed and swabbed for DNA. There were ligature marks on her wrists. She'd been restrained at some point with something, maybe a rope or cord, though none was found at the scene. Here's what haunted everyone on the investigative team. This felt personal. Burglars don't bite their victims. They don't get into extended wrestling matches. They grab what they can and run. This was rage. This was someone who wanted Michelle Torres to suffer. Detective Powell interviewed neighbors. Had anyone seen anything suspicious? Heard any screams? Most people had been out that Saturday morning, but one neighbor, Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, remembered something. Around 10 a.m., she'd heard what sounded like arguing coming from the Chen condo. A woman's voice, angry. Then another voice. Michelle's, maybe? It was hard to say, but it had caught her attention because the Chens never fought. They were the quiet couple who always smiled in the elevator. Did you hear anything else? Powell asked. There was a loud crash, like glass breaking. Then nothing. I thought maybe they dropped something. Had Mrs. Rodriguez seen anyone leave the building? No, she'd gone back to her crossword puzzle. Didn't think much of it until she heard the sirens that afternoon. The investigation team canvassed the neighborhood. They pulled security footage from nearby businesses, and this is where things got interesting. A camera from a coffee shop across the street had captured a woman leaving the Chen's building around 10:45 a.m. She was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, sunglasses, a baseball cap pulled low. She walked quickly to a car parked a block away, a white sedan, and drove off. The footage was grainy, and they couldn't make out a license plate. But it confirmed what Powell was starting to suspect. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was a targeted attack. Someone had come to that condo specifically to hurt Michelle Torres. David was beside himself. Who would want to hurt her? She's a nurse. She helps people. Everyone loved Michelle. Detective Powell had to ask the difficult questions. Did Michelle have any enemies? Anyone who might wish her harm? Had she been involved in any disputes at work? Any ex-boyfriends who couldn't let go? David shook his head to all of it. Michelle was drama-free. She'd had a few relationships before him, nothing serious. She'd never mentioned anyone bothering her or making her feel unsafe. What about you, David? Powell asked gently. Anyone from your past who might have had a problem with your marriage? And there it was, the briefest hesitation. David's eyes dropped to the floor. There was someone, he finally said. A long time ago. Before Michelle. David Chen told Detective Powell about Jennifer Hastings. They'd dated for about 2 years, from 2001 to 2003, before he met Michelle. It hadn't been a serious relationship, at least not for David. But Jennifer? Jennifer had been different. She'd talked about marriage. She'd pushed for commitment. And when David had tried to cool things off, she hadn't taken it well. "What do you mean she didn't take it well?" Powell asked. David explained that Jennifer had shown up at his apartment unannounced, called him at all hours, sent him long emails professing her love. It had gotten uncomfortable enough that David had eventually been blunt with her. They weren't getting back together, and she needed to stop contacting him. Finally, she'd stopped. That was in late 2003. He hadn't heard from her in over 2 years. Here's the detail that made Powell's radar ping. Jennifer Hastings was a police officer with the Seattle Police Department. Not just any officer. By 2006, she'd made detective and worked in the burglary division. Let me paint you a picture of what that meant. Jennifer knew how crime scenes were processed. She knew what evidence detectives looked for. She knew how to stage a scene. She had access to weapons, including the .38 caliber revolvers that some SPD officers still carried as backups. And she absolutely would have known how to make a murder look like a botched burglary. But here's where the investigation hit a wall that would stand for 23 years. When Detective Powell tried to pursue Jennifer Hastings as a suspect, he ran into resistance from his own department. Powell's lieutenant called him into his office. "I heard you're looking at Detective Hastings for the Torres case. She dated the victim's husband. She had a history of not handling the breakup well. It's worth investigating." The lieutenant leaned back in his chair. "Jennifer Hastings is a decorated officer. She's got commendations. She's one of us. You better have damn solid evidence before you start making accusations." Powell didn't have solid evidence. What he had was a theory, a motive, and a woman in security footage they couldn't identify. He went to interview Jennifer anyway. She agreed to meet him at the station, came in voluntarily, sat across from him in the interview room, looking completely calm and cooperative. "I heard about what happened to David's wife," she said. "It's terrible. I hope you catch whoever did it." Powell asked her about her relationship with David. She was matter-of-fact about it. Yes, they'd dated. Yes, she'd been disappointed when it ended, but that was years ago. She'd moved on. She was in a relationship with someone else now, actually, a fellow officer. "Where were you on Saturday morning, February 11th? "I was at the gym. My regular Saturday workout. I can give you the name of the gym." "What time?" "I got there around 8:30 a.m., left around 11. "Anyone who can verify that?" She shrugged. "I'm sure the front desk logged me in. I don't really pay attention to who else is there. I'm focused on my workout." Powell asked if she'd be willing to provide a DNA sample. "Just to rule her out," he said. And here's where Jennifer Hastings showed exactly how smart she was. "Am I a suspect in something, detective? Because if I am, I think I should probably have a lawyer present." She wasn't technically refusing. She was just asserting her rights. Something any cop would do in that situation, guilty or not. Powell didn't have enough to compel a DNA sample. He didn't have probable cause for a warrant. He had a hunch and a protective department that didn't want one of their own dragged through the mud. The case stayed open, but it went nowhere. Powell followed up on the gym alibi. Yes, Jennifer had checked in that morning, but the timestamp on the computer system showed 8:27 a.m. Plenty of time to check in, leave, drive to the Chen's condo, only 15 minutes away, commit the murder, and be back at the gym by 11 o'clock. No one remembered actually seeing her working out that morning. The gym was busy on Saturday mornings. The DNA from the bite mark on Michelle's arm came back from the lab. It was definitely from a female. That was unusual. Most violent crimes are committed by men, but it didn't match anyone in the system. Without a comparison sample from Jennifer, it was just data sitting in a file. For David Chen, the lack of answers was torture. He knew Jennifer had done this. He felt it in his bones. When Powell told him they couldn't pursue it further without more evidence, David was furious. "She's a cop. Of course you're protecting her." "We're not protecting anyone," Powell insisted. "But I can't arrest someone without evidence. That's not how this works." David hired a private investigator. The PI tried to dig up dirt on Jennifer, followed her around, interviewed people she knew. Nothing. Jennifer was careful. She went about her life, did her job, never slipped up. Months passed, then a year, then two. Michelle's murder officially went cold. The file sat in a box with dozens of other unsolved cases gathering dust. Roberto and Carmen Torres were devastated, not just by their daughter's death, but by the fact that her killer was walking free. They held vigils. They contacted the media. They begged the police department to keep investigating. Carmen started a victims advocacy group, pouring her grief into helping other families navigate the criminal justice system. But for her own daughter, there was no justice. David eventually moved away from Seattle. He couldn't stand living in that city anymore, couldn't stand the possibility of running into Jennifer on the street. The condo where Michelle died was sold. David tried to rebuild his life, but part of him stayed frozen in that moment when he walked through the door and found his wife's body. And Jennifer Hastings? She kept working for the Seattle Police Department, got promoted, solved cases, attended police benefit dinners, lived her life like she hadn't beaten and shot a woman to death in a jealous rage. The system had failed Michelle Torres. But here's the thing about DNA evidence. It doesn't care how much time passes. It doesn't care about office politics or blue lines. It just waits. Fast forward to 2029. 23 years after Michelle Torres was murdered, the Seattle Police Department formed a new cold case unit. Detective Sarah Kim was assigned to review unsolved homicides from the 2000s, armed with new technology and fresh eyes. The Torres case was one of the first files she pulled. When she read through the original investigation, certain things jumped out at her. The staged burglary, the female DNA from the bite mark, the interview with David about his ex-girlfriend, and most significantly, the name Jennifer Hastings. Detective Kim ran a search on Jennifer. She'd retired from SPD in 2026 after a 30-year career, living in a suburb outside Seattle, divorced. Kim started pulling everything she could find. Old reports Jennifer had written, cases she'd worked, disciplinary records. There were none. Then Kim did something simple but crucial. She contacted the gym where Jennifer had claimed to be on the morning of the murder. The business had changed hands twice since 2006, but the new owners had kept old records in storage. Kim found the original sign-in logs from February 2006. Jennifer Hastings had checked in at 8:27 a.m. on February 11th. But here's what was interesting. There was no checkout log. The gym had an electronic check-in system, but relied on people to manually sign out at the front desk, which most members didn't bother with. More importantly, Kim pulled security footage from the gym that had been saved to backup drives and never reviewed, footage that showed Jennifer entering at 8:27 a.m. and leaving again at 8:51 a.m., 24 minutes. She'd been at the gym for 24 minutes, not until 11 a.m. like she'd claimed. Kim felt her pulse quicken. She went back to the Torres file and found the security footage from the coffee shop near the Chen's building, the woman in the baseball cap leaving around 10:45 a.m. The timeline fit perfectly, but Kim needed more. She needed DNA, and she couldn't just walk up to a retired police officer and ask for a sample without tipping her off. This is where Kim got creative. She started following Jennifer's routine. Where did she go? What did she do? One evening, Kim watched Jennifer have dinner at a local restaurant. After Jennifer left, Kim went in and spoke to the server. She identified herself as a detective working a cold case and asked if she could have the glass and utensils Jennifer had used. The server complied. Kim sent the glass to the lab with a rush order. The DNA was compared against the sample from the bite mark on Michelle Torres' arm. It was a match. After 23 years, they finally had her. But here's where things got complicated. Kim had to present her findings to the department brass, and she knew there would be resistance. Jennifer Hastings was a retired detective with 3 decades of service. Accusing her of murder would be explosive. Kim built an airtight case. She compiled everything: the timeline discrepancies, the staged burglary that showed insider knowledge of police procedures, David's statement about Jennifer's possessive behavior after their breakup, the DNA match, and one more thing: that security. Footage from the building hallway. Remember the pre-intro, that footage of someone approaching the Chen's condo door? Kim had it enhanced using new video technology. The woman in the footage was wearing civilian clothes, but if you looked closely at her gait, at the way she moved, there was something distinctive. Kim found training videos from 2005 showing SPD officers in physical fitness drills. There was Jennifer Hastings running exercises. The movement pattern was identical. On September 8, 2029, 23 years and 7 months after Michelle Torres was murdered, Jennifer Hastings was arrested at her home. The media went crazy. A former police detective charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend's wife? It was the kind of story that dominated headlines for months. Jennifer's first words to the arresting officers? "I want my lawyer." She was arraigned on charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Park, who knew this case would be the biggest of his career. The defense hired high-powered attorneys who immediately began attacking the DNA evidence. The trial began in March 2030. For 8 weeks, the city of Seattle watched as the case unfolded in court. David Chen testified about his relationship with Jennifer, about her inability to let go. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, Jennifer's DNA from the bite mark on Michelle's arm. They showed the security footage from the gym, proving she'd lied about her alibi. They walked the jury through the staged burglary scene and explained how only someone with police training would know exactly what to do to make a murder look like a random break-in. The defense argued that the DNA evidence had been mishandled, that 23 years was too long to maintain chain of custody. They tried to paint David Chen as a spurned ex-boyfriend seeking revenge by framing an innocent woman. They brought in Jennifer's colleagues who testified to her character, her dedication to justice, her years of service. But the prosecution had an ace up their sleeve: the bite mark. The forensic odontologist testified that the bite pattern on Michelle's arm matched Jennifer's dental records perfectly. Not just the DNA, but the physical impression itself. The jury could see photographs, the deep crescent-shaped marks on Michelle's forearm next to 3D models of Jennifer's teeth. It was damning. And then there was the video evidence. The enhanced footage from the building hallway showed someone who moved like Jennifer, at a time when Jennifer claimed to be at the gym but wasn't. The coffee shop camera caught the same person fleeing the scene. The defense tried to create doubt, but the evidence was overwhelming. On May 17, 2030, after deliberating for 3 days, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Jennifer Hastings showed no emotion. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead as the verdict was read. But David Chen, sitting in the gallery next to Michelle's parents, broke down sobbing. Carmen Torres gripped her husband's hand, tears streaming down her face. 24 years after losing their daughter, they finally had an answer. At sentencing, the judge addressed Jennifer Hastings directly. "You were sworn to uphold the law. Instead, you murdered an innocent woman out of jealousy and rage, then hid behind your badge for decades. You betrayed everything your profession stands for." Jennifer was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case sent shockwaves through the Seattle Police Department and sparked a broader conversation about how law enforcement investigates crimes involving their own. An internal review found that the original investigation had been compromised. Detectives had been discouraged from pursuing Jennifer as a suspect. Evidence had been overlooked, and concerns had been dismissed because of who she was. The department implemented new protocols requiring outside agencies to review any case where a law enforcement officer might be involved. Michelle's law, named in her honor, passed in Washington state in 2031, mandating independent investigations in such circumstances. For David Chen, the conviction brought a measure of peace, though it could never bring Michelle back. He remarried eventually, had children, but he never forgot his first wife, the nurse with the bright smile who'd been taken from him in the cruelest way. Carmen Torres continued her advocacy work, now focusing specifically on cold cases and the importance of never giving up. 24 years, she said in interviews. For 24 years, we lived without answers. but we never stopped believing that the truth would come out. For every family waiting for justice, I want them to. No, don't lose hope. Michelle Torres was 29 years old when she was murdered. She'd been married for less than a year. She'd spent her life caring for others, saving lives in the ICU, bringing comfort to the scared and suffering. She deserved to grow old with the man she loved. She deserved to become the mother she'd dreamed of being. She deserved justice. Jennifer Marie Hastings was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including lying in wait and murder by a peace officer. She received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, which she is currently serving at Washington Correction Center for Women. Today, Michelle is remembered not just as a victim, but as the catalyst for change in how law enforcement polices its own. Her death, tragic as it was, helped ensure that no badge would ever again shield a killer from justice. Rest in peace, Michelle Torres. Your light still shines in the lives you touched and the changes your story brought into the world.